You know, the Colts have so many questions going into this offseason, so many things that need to be addressed. And a GM that's kind of notorious for not making a whole bunch of moves. Now, some would call him calculated for that. Some may call him complacent. Some people may even use another C word, and you could fill in the blank. Here's a secret, though. Between me and you, I don't have any confidence at all in Chris Ballard to get it done to the degree it needs to get done this offseason. I think that's one thing that's misunderstood about my take on Chris Ballard, because I've been pretty vocal about the fact and received quite a bit of backlash from those of you that are kind enough to come here and sit and watch me really in my bedroom talk about this team. I've been vocal about the fact that I understood the decision to bring him back for one more run, in the sense that you would be tied together with Anthony Richardson and Shane Steichen and kind of let them rise or die together. And then if you have to get rid of them, you could kind of do it all in one foul swoop. So it's kind of this one aligned motion. But just because I view that as a logical approach to the situation, albeit one that's aggravating for a lot of Colts fans, doesn't mean I have all of this confidence that Chris Ballard is going to be the guy that is going to get things turned around, particularly in the near term for the Indianapolis Colts. Now, obviously today I had anticipated talking about Chris Ballard's presser from yesterday, but of course he's sick. And I'll tell you, Chris Ballard doesn't strike me as the type of individual that's scared to talk to the media. I know a lot of people are saying he was dodging the media. I think maybe that's what you would do. I don't know if you were in that situation. Like, I understand the heat that he's going to be under, but Chris Ballard, say what you want about him, he has never struck me as scared to talk to the media and even try to defend himself and be outspoken. Like, Chris Ballard is honestly one of my favorite pieces of media every year. Is that Chris Ballard press conference. I absolutely love watching that thing. So I was pretty disappointed. But the last couple of years, they were on January 10th and January 11th, respectively. Now, I don't know how those dates worked out with the end of the season, but it did feel like the 7th was a little bit of a quick turnaround on that thing, all things considered, but neither here nor there. That thing is going to be real interesting to listen to, because is he really going to come out and say the same old thing again? I mean, I'd be hard-pressed to believe that he doesn't have some sort of rebuttal that would at least give us a feint of hope going into this offseason. I mean, one of my many conditions, if I were to put myself in Irsay's shoes, the guy who is in charge of bringing back or not bringing back Chris Ballard, because you know they had to have had a conversation, or at least you'd hope they've had a tough conversation going into this offseason, I'd have asked him, right? And this would have really been the question that decided whether or not I brought Chris Ballard back. Now, of course, I'm not Jimmy Irsay, and I'm not the daughters either. Whoever it is that's running the show, I think probably Jimmy Irsay still in charge of this thing, with the daughters slowly starting to take more responsibility. But that's really neither here nor there. It's completely unrelated to the topic at hand. What I would have asked him, that would have been my condition of, am I bringing him back or am I not, is simple. What is going to be different this time around? And more specifically, can I expect you to be proactive in your pursuit of turning this team into a winner? That's the most logical question to ask, and you have to assume that it was asked, and presumably he had something to say as a retort to a question that was something similar to that. Like, listen, maybe this was all about the money, right? Maybe Jim Irsay doesn't want to pay him to sit at home, but at the same time, I mean, Jim Irsay was willing to pay Andrew Luck all of his contract when he retired, so who knows? Either way, my guess, again, is that Ballard had to have told Jim something to the effect of, hey, we are going to change something here. Something is going to be different. Now, whether or not that's true, that's really besides my point, but it's just something to consider, right? And one thing that may be able to explain, if you allow me to try to make the opposite case you might be hearing, okay? Not so much that this is my opinion per se, but just a possibility that we should consider if we're to be fair and objective in our view of the situation here. One thing that may be able to explain the lack of activity last offseason, you do wonder if going into that season, after the way Anthony Richardson's rookie year played out with the injury and ultimately not getting a real good look at him, you do wonder that before diving in head first into signing free agents, and not that, listen, right? I'm reaching right now. Okay, I'm reaching. I understand this. But before going in head first to sign free agents and acquire talent, really like talent that is win now type of talent, there probably was to some degree a level of them kind of wanting to see where Richardson was at, maybe wanting to stay flexible so that, once the season played out, they had a clearer picture of how they were going to approach this offseason as opposed to last offseason doing all these moves going through the season and realizing perhaps we were a little, I don't know, premature in doing some of these things. I don't know. Again, it's a reach. I'm just saying. I mean, it's wishful thinking, but it's also a possibility. Now, here's the problem with that. In the past, under Chris Ballard, we have been able to tell ourselves, and tell ourselves reasonably so, that we were one good offseason away. That's been the Ballard deal the entire time, where the Colts sit in a spot where we are just close enough to being a winning team, to being a playoff team, but not being there. But this offseason, this one is the first one that I could remember in quite a period of time, maybe the whole time Chris Ballard's been in charge, where I don't feel like we're only one good offseason away. And if we are, it would really take an offseason of biblical proportions. I mean, the needs on this team right now run deep, okay? Or at least the perceived needs at positions, right? I mean, let alone the upcoming free agents. Allow me a moment just to pull that up. I mean, you're talking right now, a little ad for filing taxes. Don't forget to file your taxes. You go to jail for not filing your taxes, right? It's one thing to not pay. I'm not saying to avoid your taxes. But from what I understand, people don't go to jail for not paying them. They go to jail for not filing them. 'Tis the time of the year. A little tidbit on the side. But the free agents for the Indianapolis Colts, I mean, you're talking about Ryan Kelly, Mo Ali Cox, Joe Flacco, EJ Speed, Julian Blackmon, really big ones. Dio and Dangbo, Ashton Doolin. If you ask Chris Ballard, that's a big deal. And I mean, a few other guys, those really being like the most significant ones. We'll go into that in a little bit more depth. But point being is you have all these needs and a couple of people that play key roles on the team right now that are upcoming free agents. So not only do you have to be aggressive to put this team in a spot where you feel good enough about their chances to make it to the playoffs next season, but you also have to be right about all of those moves that you make. And just them making the moves alone feels kind of unlikely, let alone them being, or let alone the ability to hit on all of them. Because listen, it is impossible, okay? You can hold a GM to whatever standard it is that you want. There is no GM that's going to go out into an offseason and every move that they make is going to be right. It's an unreasonable expectation, really in life, let alone for a general manager of a football team, okay? Now, on the other hand, right, as I bring all of that up, on the other side of things, you could talk about teams like the Chiefs and the Bills and the Lions and all this type of crap and talk about all the great teams in the league. In actuality, the only thing the Colts have to do is be better than the Houston Texans, which, by the way, is pretty good. Like, the Texans don't stink. They had some adversity this year on the injury front, but make no mistake, that's a team that's trending in the right direction. But you only have to be better than them. Right? You don't have to be better than the Chiefs. You don't have to be better than the Bills, at least in terms of, winning the division and having a seat at the table, right? That's all that has to be done. So either way, we're going to talk about some of the early needs that I see for this team at a glance and just some of the stuff I've been thinking about throughout the season. I haven't gone super deep into the research on all of this quite yet. That's what the offseason is for. We're going to talk about those things. Not so much how to fix them today. Again, just what I see on an initial glance. But before we do, you know what it is. My name is Justin. This right here is the Ride the Bench Colts podcast. As always, ask anyone watching on YouTube and enjoying the show, go ahead, shoot a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Of course, audio listeners, leave a 5-star review. Let the people know how much you're enjoying the show. Subscribe if you want to be a part of the journey. We're right now on the road to 5,000, but the first step, that's like a bigger milestone, mini milestone, 3,500. We're climbing. We're climbing right now. If you want a lot of coverage for the Colts this offseason and good coverage at that, thoughtful coverage, in my humble opinion, then perhaps you're in the right place. So do that if you'd like. But most importantly, let's get to the content, right? Be civil in the comment section, all that stuff. Don't be rude to each other. All right. Back to the needs that I see right now for the Indianapolis Colts coming into this. Now, I just made an episode, of course, on the quarterback position. They need a pivot plan at quarterback. It's not to say you completely abandon the thought of Anthony Richardson going into next season, because quite frankly, you spent the number 4 overall pick. But right now, you do look at the Indianapolis Colts and say, man, all the stuff that we look at, you do wonder, and all the conversations that we have, You wonder if we just had a quarterback, if it would all be null and void. You can't help but wonder that. I mean, you look at Richardson right now. This guy may be the pipe that burst here in Indianapolis. Like, there's a distinction between fault and blame, okay? Like, fault would be the cause of something. If you're at fault, you caused it, as opposed to blame would be assigning a responsibility for being that cause. Do you see the distinction between those two things? I know it's very minor, but it is kind of, I don't know, I like making distinctions in words like that because people throw words around all the time, and I just like to make sure we know what we're saying, okay? That's just my thing, okay? I wouldn't blame Anthony Richardson for what's going on right now because I don't really think, you know, he didn't draft himself, right? Sure, he did the actions that he did maybe throughout the course of the season if there was a lack of preparation, the poor, all that stuff. But when we look at what's going on right now at the Indianapolis Colts, man, can we say to some degree it's his fault? Not that he would be to blame, based off of at least the definitions I just laid out, but that perhaps it would be his fault. I mean, there's a reasonable case to be made for that right now because, I mean, Lord, if this pick continues to look the way that it has so far, not saying he can't prove me wrong and not saying I'm not rooting for it. Lord knows I would love Anthony Richardson to come out and be absolutely spectacular. Who wouldn't, right? This might be the one, drafting Anthony Richardson, that gets this entire regime fired. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. So if I'm them, I feel like I would need a pivot plan. Of course, I proposed Tanner McKee in one of the great ideas I've ever given you. I proposed Tanner McKee from the Eagles as a guy who's kind of low risk, high reward, can come in, both play as the backup, but then really come in and produce if needed. That's one thing. Another thing I'm looking at and saying we need something here is running back. Now, Jonathan Taylor, I'm not saying the need would be to replace him. Jonathan Taylor is a spectacular running back, but you look right now, and in my opinion, despite the fact that he has some moments out of the shotgun, I don't think Jonathan Taylor is really the type of running back meant to be consistently working out of the shotgun, let alone catching passes. Now, the problem with the Indianapolis Colts right now is, sure, I don't mind Trey Sermon as a guy that could come in and, get you 5 to 7 carries and do it pretty decently, but your best pass catching back is Tyler Goodson. Tyler Goodson? I mean, come on. With all the running backs in the NFL, all the guys that are free agents, I mean, the running back position is so plentiful. You're telling me you don't have a guy that could come in here and be a change of pace back out of the shotgun that you could trust as a pass catcher to provide a little bit of spark to this offense? I think that should be a big priority for this offense. You look overall at kind of the weapons on the team. You have Jonathan Taylor, great, and I think the wide receiver group is good. I think there's a quarterback issue here, but Michael Pittman Jr., playing with a fractured back all year, he's been nothing but great for us, and he's made nothing but clutch catches for most of his career, including some this year. So I'm going to give Pittman the pass, but you look at him, Pierce and Downs, I mean, that's a good core. Adonai Mitchell, we hope, comes into his own. Obviously, I absolutely loved his college tape. That was my favorite pick that the Colts made last year, and I'm proven to be wrong so far, right? Wrong so far after one season for a very young player. But, again, just adding kind of a lightning to the thunder that is Jonathan Taylor at running back, I think would go a long way for this Colts offense and open up what they can do from a play calling perspective, because I think you need a guy that can come in here and catch some passes. And there's enough of those guys available, even if that's all they do. Even someone as simple as like a Samaje Perine or something like that, who has reliable hands and has a history of playing in that type of role. There's nothing special about him as a back. That doesn't cost a lot of money, and it would not be all that much to go just do something little like that. It would just require being a little proactive. Next, tight end. You either got to trim the fat here and commit to one, or go get one. One of the two. I mean, you can't have 6 guys rotating around. You have to have someone at some point that you view as the guy at that position. And I do find it somewhat hard to believe that not a single one of them could do that if they were given a full-time role. I may be wrong about that, but Will Mallory is a guy I look at who's pretty fast, has great hands, and we haven't seen a whole lot out of him. Perhaps he's benefiting, in my perception, from a little bit of the unknown on that front. But I do wonder what he could bring to the table. Not saying that he's the answer at tight end, but tight end is a spot right now that you look at and say, man, particularly given Anthony Richardson's strengths, not saying that's the be-all, end-all. You could use a tight end whether you have Anthony Richardson or not. But his strengths as a passer are kind of these ones in between the hashes, which is interesting because I always find those to be maybe the more difficult throws. But those ones that are in between the numbers over the middle of the field, perhaps because of his size and just the strength of his arm, But I mean, man, he could let that thing rip over the middle of the field. And a tight end running a seam route, you have a guy that's doing that at a high level and that type of route. I mean, it would be a big piece for the offense. So that's on the offensive side of the ball. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, quite a few needs as well, as we all know. Defensive coordinator being one of them, of course, and that will continue. We'll see how that story progresses. But from a personnel perspective, I mean, at cornerback right now, at least last offseason, you were able to look at this season and say, can Juju Brents take a step? Now, Juju Brents, that experiment should be over. At least in terms of relying on him to come out there and really be on the field, right? Let alone be a guy that you could trust to get the job done at the position. But that right there, you look and you say, okay, the room as it currently stands, of course we love Kenny Moore, even though as his career continues to progress, at some point, even though he's playing out of the slot, so maybe he doesn't have to worry about that over-the-top speed quite as much, at some point, Kenny Moore, at 31, 32, I mean, corners, at some point, they fall off, but you look right now and you say, all right, we'll go off of what we've seen. Jalen Jones, Kenny Moore, great. Samuel Womack, I think, was promising if we were to keep him around because I thought that he's a great rotational piece right now at corner for us. But you can't trust Juju Brents out there for sure. And you got to bring in someone here to elevate the level of play and consistency out of this room. And whatever you do, by the way, I know I said we're not talking about how to fix it today, but this is one spot. Whatever you do, get a fucking free agent here at corner and one that's good. If we're to spend money anywhere, that's where I would like to see it. Don't you dare try to fix this through the draft. Now, I'm not saying you don't draft someone, but you got to do something else. I mean, the track record, for not for anything, for his initials to be CB and for him to not be able to draft a CB, I mean, he cannot fucking hit on a corner. The only guy he's hit on that I can even think of at corner is Jalen Jones, and he was a 7th-round pick, who I love. Obviously, you guys know I love Jalen Jones, but I mean, you know, Quincy Wilson, Rocky Sin, Juju Brents, Darius Rush. I mean, just 4 off the top of, I mean, how many corners can you possibly miss on? If you're Chris Ballard, I would not be trusting my ability to go get one. I would say, hey, let's go to fucking free agent and get some proven production at that position and a veteran that could help these guys out a little bit and set the standard in that room for what we need to be doing. That's something right there. The linebacker position, another one. Please, somebody who can cover, for goodness sake. You do wonder right now, obviously a lot of noise around EJ Speed and Zaire Franklin as a unit. I know a lot of Colts fans are against them. I think their intentions were pure, by the way, with the podcast. Whether or not you like that is fine, but the idea of giving fans a little more interaction, the idea of connecting with the fans a little bit more, I don't really view as like a bad thing. Of course, when the product on the field isn't good, that's going to be something we look to. But I mean, at the same time, as someone who does a podcast myself, I'm not going to sit here and kill them for the podcast as much as I'm going to kill them for the fact, like, do they need to be split up on some level? Like, is there an enabling going on there? I don't know the inner workings of what's going on, obviously. So I don't want to assign things to them that are kind of out of bounds, if you will. But you do just wonder. I don't think either of them individually are like a bad football player. I think both of them are pretty good, actually, all things considered. Maybe not great, but I think both of them are damn good players. And I think Zaire Franklin had earned his place in the top 100, PFF top 100, albeit the absolute last spot. But you wonder if their time together just has to come to an end. No matter how you look at it, you have to do something in this room because these guys, if nothing else, in my opinion, seem a little bit too comfortable with their roles. And again, we don't even know if EJ Speed's going to be back, but something has to be done in that linebacker room. Safety, particularly if Blackman leaves, which I think he will, and not for anything. I mean, he was horrible as a tackler for a lot of the season, at least to my eye. I don't know anything about the stats in terms of how many he missed, but I mean, man, I watched him miss quite a few, right? But he's a guy that you still can trust to kind of make a play in coverage, but nonetheless, safety is a spot that you're going to have to do something about. And again, with all of this stuff, the question is free agency, draft, both, just one. We know what Chris Ballard tends to do. But you have to understand, when I talk about this team having a lot of needs, I just said all of those things. You're talking about 3 of the 5 units on offense and 3 of the 4 units on defense, if my math serves me correct. So you're talking about 2/3, right, of the units that start for this football team aren't sufficient right now. Or at least that get playing time for this football team are not sufficient right now. And that's a whole lot to deal with in one offseason, not for anything. So we're going to kind of see how this thing progresses. But if I were to tell you right now, I'll stay optimistic. Listen, I cannot, the idea of rooting, by the way, all you guys that talk about like, okay, I'm done with the Colts, this, that, the next, totally fine. Me, I cannot do it, okay? I can't do it. The idea of watching a football season and not having someone to root for sounds absolutely terrible. And then the idea of rooting for anyone but the Indianapolis Colts makes me absolutely fucking sick, particularly from a season-long perspective. Now in the playoffs, I could get behind the football team, but I'm talking about over the course of a season and in the offseason, and someone I'm paying attention to, man, I'm ride or die Indianapolis Colts, quite frankly, no matter how much pain they put me through. Like, till death do us part. That just is what it is. And, I mean, that much is obvious. Like, why do you think I'm here with the show, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's just a little bit of discussion about what we're facing this offseason. I'd be lying if I said I was super optimistic about the entire thing, to be 100% honest with you. But I will try to continue to, keep the conversation productive instead of negative and toxic, if you will, all right? So that's it. My name is Justin. This right here was the Ride the Bench Colts podcast. Like, subscribe if you have not yet. And as always, and most importantly, go Colts.